So as advertised, my topic is roots to first year mathematics, and particularly the general route has been the HSC, particularly in New South Wales, which is the context of first year in maths New South Wales group. But there are some other routes emerging, and through where I've worked, my experiences, I've become interested in those and had to learn a little bit about them. So this morning I'm sharing a bit about those and how they may be, the effects they may have on first year mathematics at university level. So New South Wales, we've had the HSC, and it's done at the end of year 12, and students do their exam, they end up in first year university, and they've hopefully covered the mathematics in one of those courses if they've done maths for HSC. That's a conventional route. It takes 6 years, and that's fairly straightforward. Some years back, perhaps about 5 or 6 years ago, we had the Australian curriculum starting to impact that, and the way the New South Wales HSC, the type of topics there is now affected to some extent. That standardisation hasn't really been fully achieved. I know that, for example, I think Victoria have gone further in statistics in their syllabus. The New South Wales syllabus is currently under revision, and that will have some effect. It doesn't appear to be so different to the current one, particularly in extension 2, which is a bit I've been looking at, but it will change a little bit. But there are 2 emerging alternative pathways, and one of those is the International Baccalaureate, which is about 50 years old, I believe. And I'll be talking in a moment about the diploma. Be aware that there is also the PYP. You're going to get a lot of abbreviations today, and a few of them will get quite confusing. I apologise in advance for that. So the PYP, I believe, is the primary years program. Then there's the MYP, which is a middle years program, which schools do up to about year 10. And then you've got the diploma, which basically is year 11 and 12. So the International Baccalaureate. Then there's the Cambridge International A-levels, and they basically match or parallel the domestic A-levels that are done in parts of the United Kingdom. And so that's also starting to be introduced in New South Wales. So why are students taking these qualifications, and why are schools offering them? I think there's a number of reasons for that. One of them would be that you have students who are expats. And I know of a school in the Sydney CBD where there are students who come from overseas, they enrol, perhaps their parents have worked in Sydney, and it makes sense to do an exam like that because you'll be going back to an overseas context. So having an exam that is taught based on overseas context will be a good situation. Also, perhaps students are aiming to study at a university overseas, and although the HSC may be recognised in some places, it's probably easier to get recognition of something like the IB, International Baccalaureate, or something like Cambridge International exams. You also have students who prefer getting that international perspective because these are exams that are not so rooted in New South Wales or Australia generally. You get some who think it might help their ATAR, and there has been some publicity about that and a bit of a calibration of how particularly the IB results can relate to ATAR. And then there are other reasons. I'm sure there are many reasons why people would consider doing those options or not doing those options, as the case may be. Now, who is offering the IB diploma? I looked up the website 2 days ago to make sure the information is quite current. New South Wales, it's independent schools. It's not available in government schools. Currently, there are 22 schools offering or preparing to offer the IB diploma. You have what are known as candidate schools, as well as those already going ahead with that. And most of those offer the IB as an alternative to the HSC. So it's quite good timing for this, because in a few days, the HSC results will come out. They'll have all these press releases about all the wonderful results that have been achieved, and I'm sure that is the case. But you need to bear in mind there'll be some schools where some of the students don't do the HSC. So, and maybe some very capable students are doing the IB instead. There is even at least one school in Sydney where they only offer the IB for year 11 and 12. There may be others, but there is at least one. So those students, if they're going towards university, definitely will have the IB as their credential. I widened it a little bit to the ACT, Australian Capital Territory. And there, government schools are allowed to do the International Baccalaureate, and there are 2 of them that do it. And in total, there were 6 schools offering the IB diploma, that's the Year 11-12 program, to their students. And of course, there are many schools in other states that do the IB. Cambridge international exams are a bit newer to Australia. However, the IGCSE, so we're back into the abbreviations, the International General Certificate of School Education, maybe have a drink of water after that. That's a sort of a parallel version of the GCSE, which essentially in England, Wales and Northern Ireland is the Year 11 exams. I leave Scotland out because their system is different. According to their website, in New South Wales, there are 6 secondary schools offering at least the IGCSEs. There may be more, I think, but at least the website recognises that. Some of them are offering subjects like global politics, which are not available as a NSW type subject, NSW being the New South Wales Education Standards Authority. And the school where I work has started to introduce A-level exams for some students, and that will extend into mathematics in the next couple of years. So A-levels, which we'll talk about in a moment, are also on the radar. And it should be noted that the education laws in each state and territory are different, and that creates possibly more obstacles in some states than others into bringing in alternative exams. Some may have requirements, for example, that you must do English as a subject. And in something like A-levels, as we'll look at shortly, English is not compulsory. So that adds a bit of an issue to that. The momentum does seem to be towards more students sitting these exams. How rapid that growth will be, I don't know, but it seems to be going in that direction. In terms of looking at who's coming into university, of course, there are international students who may well have done these exams, who are applying from overseas. You also have, I only realised this the other day, that you can apply to do some of this privately through the British Council. And so, in theory, you could have private students in Australia doing them as well. So these routes to university are ones that need to be considered. Now, in a nutshell, I'll just go through these because not everybody's familiar with them and sometimes things change. HSC, my understanding of it, at least 11 units. Each unit is, most subjects are 2 units. There's a few 1-unit subjects, maybe 1 or 2. And then there are extension 1, which adds to the 2-unit subject, and extension 2, which adds to the 2-unit, extension 1 and extension 2. It's like a package, although they can be spread out over a number of years, sort of staggered. English is compulsory. Mathematics is not compulsory, although having passing a numeracy test at some point is. They're based on New South Wales. They have an Australian context, and they're basically done by schools, as it says in New South Wales. There is still one school in Canberra that does the HSC for some of its students, and there are some overseas schools that do the HSC. I think in Malaysia and Singapore would be examples, maybe in somewhere like Papua New Guinea for expat type students. There's no character or community service type dimension to the HSC. You do the course, you do your assessments, you do the exam, and you come out with marks that can then be translated through to an ATAR. The IB, a little bit different, 6 subjects, and you can either do those at higher level or standard level. You need to do 3 of them at higher level, and there's a balance across what you can do. So you need to do, for example, 2 languages, but one of them would be English, at least in our context. So English, mathematics, compulsory at some level. It has an international context, and there is a character or community service type dimension to it. And there is a subject that's part of it called theory of knowledge. So maybe the attempt is to create a more rounded type of student than the HSC. Cambridge A-levels or Cambridge International A-levels, as I say, it's modelled on what's used in most of the United Kingdom, but not Scotland. At least 3 subjects. So notice the greater specialisation there. 4 of those would be at AS, which is an advanced subsidiary level. English is not compulsory, maths is not compulsory. The context is deliberately made international. So the Cambridge International exams are similar, I guess, in difficulty to the domestic GCSE and then A-level, but they are more international in the perhaps examples they put in, problems and so on. There are characteristics of a Cambridge learner, but there's no sort of character or community service type dimension. So in a nutshell, those are the three that I'm discussing today. Now, we'll look at each of them in terms of the way they do assessment. And again, we'll go one by one. I guess these could be summarised into some sort of comparison table at some point. HSC, 50% terminal exam. So at the end of the course, 50% internal assessment, which gets moderated by the performance of the group in the internal assessment. The internal assessment gets ranked and then scaled. So until the day that the students have completed their internal assessment, ranking is extremely important. And in some contexts, that can have a dynamic in the classroom, because if you're in a very academic and highly competitive classroom, in some cases, getting that ranking can be all important. Then there is all the scaling. Otherwise, if schools gave them all wonderfully high internal assessments and they did not so well in the exam, it would all not work. So they get moved around, or adjusted up and down. It's examined once per year, and that will be a difference to the other two exams that we're talking about. Scientific calculators are allowed, and there's been a bit of, movement on that recently. So until recently, calculators that, for example, did surd simplification were not allowed. They are now allowed. And there are two models in particular that seem to do a little bit more. I think one of them can do logs in bases other than E or 10. And so they become sought after to some extent, because students then perhaps have the best calculator they're allowed to use. Exams in maths include multiple choice. That varies from maybe 10 questions in the harder calculus papers to, I think, even more in standard. That's mandated by NSW. So I think every subject pretty well had to go to some multiple choice, or most subjects. And the grading is in performance bands. In other words, after they mark all the exams and they get all the marks, they judge what mark would be this band, because they meet certain performance requirements. Then there's another cutoff, and so on. That's what HSC Maths looks like. With IB, the end of course exams, and there's more than one paper, 80%. The internal assessment, now here's where the abbreviations really get tricky, the IA, okay? So that just gets referred to typically as the IA. That's a research paper. It's externally moderated, so the teacher marks it. The teacher can also give structured feedback. It becomes quite a big project, and that will be externally moderated. The people who do the marking might ask for samples and see how different ones were marked and whether that accords with the general standard expected. There are two exam series. So unlike the HSC, where you can only do the exam once a year, this is offered in different times of the year. And resits are permitted. If you want to redo the HSC, you have to wait a whole year. With these ones, you could resit after 6 months. GDCs, we're abbreviating again, graphic display calculators, are very much part of the course, and particularly in actually all of the IB subjects. And as we'll see in a moment, there are 4 options there. These are allowed, and they are really integral to the approach of solving problems, using graphs, for example, to solve equations where they intersect or cross the axes, that sort of thing. So 2 or 3 papers per course, and they may test slightly different things or different style of questions. And you get a grade from 1 to 7, and that goes across all of the IB type subjects, then feeds into giving the total result, which then feeds into an ATAR in our context. Cambridge, how is that assessed? 100% exam. Okay, so you prepare for it, and that's what you do. They offer 2 exam series, and again, you can see that split roughly 6 months apart. I should add that definitely with the Cambridge, I'm familiar with the IGCSE. There are different versions of the exam to match different time zones, and students get put in, I'm not going to use the word confinement, they get supervised to make sure that the time zones aren't compromised. It's very well structured. And there are different ways you can accumulate your result. Either you can do it in stages, so AS and then A, or linear, you can do it at the end of the course. And you can also stop after doing the subsidiary, the first of the 2 years, or go on and do the whole A-level. Resits are definitely permitted, and in another context of A-level, which is obviously close to international A-level, I do know of a student who made I won't say made a career of that, this is teaching overseas, but he did quite a few resits until he got his exam to a certain level. And he got to university and he got there. So there we are. Scientific calculators allowed, so similar like to the HSC in that regard. You end up doing generally 4 modules, and each one will have an exam, and there are ways that those marks are put together, and that's on their specifications, which are freely available. Graded from E up to A star. A star is a way of distinguishing from good to sort of superhero results. Okay, so those are how the assessments compare. Now the actual courses with the HSC would be used to. There are 4 standard, which sort of includes algebra, financial, geometry such as area and volume, various applications of mathematics such as blood alcohol limits, but no blood alcohol content, I should say, but no calculus. Then we have advanced, which is the basic calculus course with algebra, trig, probability, financial series, and so on. Extension 1 brings in vectors, stats, harder type problems, calculus, harder calculus, induction, binomial theorem, that sort of material. Extension 2, you've got harder integration, complex numbers, vectors, harder vectors, that is, harder proofs, and also mechanics. So HSC then has those 4 levels, you can see them there. And if you do, say, extension 1, that requires you to have done all of advanced plus extension 1, even if the extension 1 is done, particularly extension 2 is done after extension 1, that can be done. You can do extension 1 year, if you're accelerated, then do extension 2 the next year. But to do 1 or 2, you have to have done the stuff that's lower down. I think that's fairly straightforward. They brought in some common content, and that allows for or assists scaling and giving grades between the different levels. And notice there are no option topics in any of those syllabuses or syllabi. With IB, you have 4 levels. Now here we go. We have AISL, AIHL, AASL, and AAHL. Okay, and the HL includes all of the SL and extends it in both cases. The AI ones, applications and interpretation, they're the more practical applying maths, as the name would suggest. Whereas the other 2 are the more, I guess, the high-level theoretical type courses. I think that the first one, the AISL, would probably sit somewhere between standard and advanced. And the others, you'd have to sort of move them up similarly. So the AIHL, perhaps somewhere between advanced and extension 1. AASL maybe somewhere near extension 1. AAHL has certainly elements of extension 2, would include some things, but not other things, go further in some. It's not an exact matchup, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, there is a common core, though, between the AISL and the AASL. And again, there are no option topics. However, the IA, that's the internal assessment, the research project, does allow the student to choose their own topic. And they are rewarded if they can take a topic that goes further than what they've studied, and particularly what they've studied up to that point. So it does reward students extending themselves and pursuing their own interests. Okay, Cambridge, so it basically would match year 12 and 13, remembering that in places like England, they have 7 years of high school, and it then feeds through into university that there are cases where they can get their honours degree in 3 years because they're sort of starting at a higher point. So it builds on the IGCSE, which is the year 11 exam. I've just come off taking a class of mine did that exam. I taught them for the last part of that. And it's a course that builds a very comprehensive knowledge of the material up to, here it would be year 10 or some of year 11. So that's what the A-level builds on. As I say, you do 2 modules for AS, and then you do another 2 for A-level. That's the second year of it. you can take the pure mathematics 1 and pure mathematics 2 and exit at AS. That's the, it would be like exiting at year 12 compared to year 13. So after doing 1 year of the A level. Then there's further mathematics, and that builds on the mathematics course. And you can see there it's got various further modules that really extend those. And we'll talk about some of what's in those in a moment. There are no option topics. However, of course, you do get some choice in the modules. So an A-level student may have done mechanics and stats, or they might have done more pure and no stats, or more pure and no mechanics. So that can vary a little bit. When I look through it, what's similar between the three of them, there is a lot of similarity. And in the topics I've listed there, they cover a lot of the same thing. I mean, mathematics being very much an international type of subject, I guess it's what you would expect. Even the slight differences in notation or terminology, I don't think are a big deal with that. With the IGCSE, which I've been familiar with lately, I mean, there are little differences. Maybe in congruence, in New South Wales, we use AAS for one of the congruence tests, angle, psi. In the IGCSE, they use ASA. The difference is like that. When we have to shade regions, we tend to shade in the required region. They have problems where they shade out the not required region. So if the required region in the plane is a triangle, they shade all the bits that are not in it, whereas we tend to shade the bit that is in the triangle. Okay, they're not major things. You can easily teach a student how to deal with that. And in these sort of topics in the HSC, IB, Cambridge, I don't think the differences are very big. Here are some of the differences I think that are there. Now, these are things that either are in IB or Cambridge, or they have a bit more detail in them. Okay, so they may be in the HSC but not in the same detail, or they may not be there at all. And so looking at the IB, first of all, I think this is quite important, that to do well in this research paper, they need to do sustained mathematical writing. I know in some first-year university courses that's something that is noticed that the students aren't very good at that, because HSC, unless the internal assessment the teacher chose to do involve that, then they may have done very little of that. Whereas in this IA, it is mandated and they are marked on that. They look at things like there are five criteria, and there are two of them, the structure and the communication. So a student who's done that probably has been better prepared in that than a student doing the HSC, unless their school chose to do an internal assessment topic or task that involved that. And I'm not sure how common that would be.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What does it mean by sustained?
I guess it's got to be structured. We're talking about pages of work.
Okay.
So not just solving a question and putting a few sentences in it. It's investigating something and going through their investigation. So it's a major thing. It's worth 20%, and they can see the value, and they try to standardise it across schools all around the world that do this. Yeah. It does, of course, this style of assessment can raise the issue, well, to what extent is the IA affected by AI, as in artificial intelligence? I'm sure they must have ways of policing that, but it's an issue that emerges, I think. The actual exams in IB that I've looked at, I think the questions are a bit more open-ended and maybe bigger, maybe worth more marks. With the HSC, it's very much, you're told in brackets, it's out of this, it's out of this, it's out of this, even in the different parts of the question. So if it's out of 3, well, perhaps we're looking to make sure we do 3 things and so on. With those, you might get more marks, but to cater for a larger number of instructions. So the questions, I think, tend to be more open-ended, and some of their exam papers really emphasise that. Of course, you've got that international context, but that can be as little as having different place names rather than place names in the same country. Now, if they've done the MYP, which a lot of the IB schools have done, they make a big focus on algebraic patterns there. So seeing patterns that might be quadratic, not just linear, and they really major on that. So students who are coming through this system may well be more versed in how to do those sort of questions, and hopefully that affects the way they think about them. And definitely they need to be more familiar with using a GDC, and in the exam, they've got to be able to do that to solve some of the problems. They're not ones that can easily be done by sort of written calculations. I should say that in the AA, the analysis and applications papers, there are still the questions that involve more of the calculation and the writing and so on. But the AI, there's probably more of the more of the GDCs. Okay, I'll keep moving. These are some of the differences in the IB as well for the specific courses. So they're going to see matrices if they do AIHL. Hypothesis testing, which is important in first-year university statistics. They're much more likely to have done that. In fact, the HSC, it's not there, but it certainly is there in the IB. And using, we anglicise it to Voronoi, I think it's Voron-Wa, something like that, diagrams. They're in all of the AI courses. And these are some other things that are in AAHL, which would be their top academic course. You can see there's a lot of stuff there that would appear in first-year university maths. And so students coming through from this are likely to be quite familiar with those sort of things. Okay, one on the other side though, mechanics doesn't make much of an appearance in IB at all. There is some calculus that perhaps does motion and so on, but much less in the way of mechanics. Okay, as far as Cambridge goes, I'll just go back one there. These are some of the things that appear in Cambridge that are either not in the HSC or not as big. Notice implicit differentiation used to be in conic sections, but it's not a requirement now, but it's certainly still there in Cambridge. Central limit theorem, which I believe is about to enter the HSC, is already there in the probability and stats module in Cambridge. You can see a few others, chi-square tests, which again are used extensively in first year university. And a few others there. So a student doing this, particularly if they've done the stats module, probability and stats, have done things that are going to equip them well for first year university. A few others, I think Hooke's law used to be in the HSC, and circular motion did as well, but they're still alive and well in Cambridge. Okay. So here's just a few questions, perhaps to generate some discussion. I'll just let you have a look at those. So I guess the one that particularly interests me is if you're having students who have covered this material and hopefully learnt it well, and they're coming into first year university courses where they may have covered a fair bit of it, how does that affect how they're prepared for or how they're catered for? Bearing in mind that if they've done particularly the further maths in Cambridge, that's really going further than, it's like an extra year really compared to HSC. So these are questions that I think need to be considered.